Hi, I'm Nathaniel Stinnett of the Environmental Voter Project, and today we are answering the question, does calling voters really work? I'm going to share my screen here. I know this is a question that many of you who have volunteered for campaigns have asked, and hopefully we're going to give you some good information today. As you may know, the Environmental Voter Project is a nonpartisan nonprofit that identifies people who care deeply about climate and the environment who aren't voting, and then we get them to become better voters. And we mobilize these voters in 5 different ways. We do volunteer phone calls, volunteer door knocking, handwritten postcards, and then we as a staff also do direct mail and digital ad campaigns. But today, in this mini briefing, we're obviously going to be talking just about volunteer phone calls. First, I want to start with going through just some basics of our script. Now, our script is a few pages long because we want to give our volunteers answers to any question that a voter might ask. But we're just going to highlight a few sections of the script here before we jump into our results so you can find out if calling voters actually works and gets them to the polls. First, we always are very explicit that it's a volunteer calling this voter. It's very important. Lots of studies have shown that people, when they're called on the phone, respond better when they know there's a volunteer at the other end of the line. Second, we create what's called a choice architecture. It's a fancy term that behavioral scientists use to pretty much mean we phrase questions in a way that makes it more likely that people will give the response that we want. So in this particular instance, our choice architecture isn't asking people if they're going to vote or not. Man, that makes it real easy for them to say, no, I'm not. Instead, we want to say, are you going to be voting early, by ballot drop-off, by mail, or on election day? That makes it really hard for them to say, well, actually, sir, actually, ma'am, I'm not going to vote at all. That makes it hard for them to say that. Even though, at least at the Environmental Voter Project, we're only calling people who have a history of not voting. So again, the way we craft this question is such that we want to make it hard for them to say, no, I'm not voting. We want to make it easier for them to just say, oh, yeah, I'm voting. If they say that they are going to vote, we don't say thank you for voting. We don't want to stress the action of voting or not, even though, let's be honest, that's better English and certainly better writing. Instead, we want to stress their identity. We know that's much more important to people, and it's much better at actually driving action. So if someone says, I'm going to vote, we say, thank you for being a good voter. We're implicitly, or actually explicitly, saying, okay, you have decided to be a good voter rather than a bad voter. This is about who you are, not the value of your one vote and whether you're taking this action or not. If someone says they're not voting, we want to say, oh, we don't hear that very often. We want to let some peer pressure enter into the discussion here. We want to make it seem like these people are outliers. They are alone in not voting, in that most of their peers are actually doing the opposite, and that they are voting. And here's something that's really important. A lot of scripts that we see, if someone's not voting, they say, oh, well, why aren't you voting? Could you tell me why you're not voting? Oh, dear God, that's the last thing you want to say. You don't want to get people to open up and start rationalizing why they're not voting. You want to do the opposite. You want to get them to start verbalizing what would make them be a voter. And so we say, oh, we don't hear that very often. Would you be comfortable sharing what might make you change your mind and be a voter? Again, it's not about the action, it's about their identity as a voter or a non-voter. This gets them to start thinking and verbalizing, vocalizing what that different identity would be. And ultimately, what we're trying to do with all of this is get someone who has a history of not voting that often to say on the record that they're going to vote. Because ultimately, most people, let's face it, just want to get off the phone, and they're probably embarrassed about not being a good voter, and they're just going to tell us what we want to hear. Oh, yeah, yeah, I'm going to be a voter. And that's like a trap closing on them. Because now it also enables you to follow back up with them closer to the election and reminds them of the fact that they said that they were going to vote. And now you can take advantage of the fact that most human beings want to be thought of as honest promise keepers. And so you say, hey, you said you were going to vote. Tuesday's your opportunity to follow through on that promise. Again, holding people to a really important societal norm, another behavioral science technique that takes advantage of people's identity. Most people want to be thought of as good voters and good promise keepers. These are just some of the very sophisticated behavioral science tricks that are in what otherwise seems like a very, very simple phone script. Okay, how do we know this works? Well, we submit this to randomized control trials. Very briefly, what a randomized control trial is if we're calling a whole bunch of people in a state who we know are unlikely to vote, what we don't do is just immediately start calling the whole bunch of them. Instead, before we talk to a single one of them, we randomly separate them into two groups, a treatment group and a control group. That control group, we set them aside and we never talk to them. The treatment group, they're the ones who we canvass and call and mail and send digital ads to with this behavioral science-informed messaging. And particularly, in this instance, where we're concerned with phone calls, we've run a whole bunch of experiments where we have only used volunteer phone calls to mobilize voters. But again, only to this treatment group. That control group is still up on the shelf, not getting any of our volunteer phone calls. Then the election happens, and then something really cool happens, which is a few months after Election Day in every city and state across the country, public voter files are updated, and we can see which of our targets voted and which of them didn't vote. Because who you vote for is secret, but whether you vote or not, that's public record. And by doing this, we can isolate what our sole impact is with these volunteer phone calls while controlling for all outside variables. Because let's say 10% of them in our control group who we didn't call voted, but 12% in our treatment group did vote. Well, that means we can isolate that we were solely responsible for increasing turnout 2 percentage points over our control group, while isolating for all other campaigns and weather and external factors. Because as long as that initial separation process was truly random, well, we've controlled for all of those things. Now, in many of these experiments, yeah, we get an increase in turnout over our control group, but it's not what statisticians call a statistically significant result, which essentially means the increase wasn't big enough for us to say, oh, it wasn't due to random occurrence, or the groups of voters we were experimenting with weren't big enough to say that it wasn't due to random occurrence. But just over the past 2.5 years, so in 2023, 2024, and 2025 at the Environmental Voter Project, we have seen a whole bunch of campaigns where we have only run volunteer phone banks. And in these randomized control trials, we have gotten statistically significant results proving the impact of scripts like this. Now, in really low turnout elections, like local and odd year elections, you can see sometimes we can increase turnout 2, 3, 4 percentage points over our control group, which is a really big deal in politics. Now, in even year or higher turnout elections, obviously the results are lower. And in elections like a presidential general, you would never expect that simply by making volunteer phone calls, you'd be able to get a statistically significant increase in turnout. But what we do know is that these phone calls work. And so even if on their own in these really high turnout elections, you can't pick up or isolate your impact, we know that they are working. And so this is why we test everything we do at the Environmental Voter Project. And this is why we and our volunteers can feel really confident and comfortable that the messages they're delivering to voters will get them to the polls. And in short, we have proof in elections big and small, low turnout and high turnout, that our phone banks work. So thank you for being part of our work at the Environmental Voter Project. We value our volunteers so much that we run these experiments so we can provide information like this to you. And we hope that you will always go to environmentalvoter.org/get-involved to sign up to call voters for us. We know it works. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.